Hello, everybody, and welcome to WOTS 2021. Thank you for joining us for today's fall feature. Today's guest is Professor Tim Currie from the University of King's College. We'll be talking about journalism in the modern age and what makes King's journalism program so unique. I'm Sienna, and I'll be your host. WOTS Toronto operates on land that is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Peytoon First Nations, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. This territory is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Anishinaabeg and Allied Nations to care for and share the resources around the Great Lakes in peace. We encourage you to educate yourself about the land that you occupy wherever it is that you're tuning in from. So my guest today, as mentioned, is Tim Currie. Tim Currie teaches online journalism at King's, including undergraduate multimedia production workshops and a master's course in social media. He is an award-winning researcher and is co-editor of The New Journalist: Roles, Skills, and Critical Thinking. Professor Currie has written and contributed to ethics guidelines for the Canadian Association of Journalists on topics such as unpublishing, the use of social media, corrections, and online commenting. He has written articles on online journalism issues for the Nyman Journalism Lab and JSource. Professor Currie worked as a freelance reporter and editor for the CBC and other outlets before returning to King's in 1994, and he has led the School of Journalism's online journalism instruction since 1999. You can read more about his work at timcurrie.ca. Hello and welcome.
Hi, great to be here. Thanks.
You have been working at King's for as long as I've been alive, so I am sure you have plenty of wisdom to give to us about this field today.
Yeah, it does seem like a long time now that you mention it.
There's a perspective there. So I'd love for you to introduce yourself to us in the context of this field. Why did you pursue journalism as a profession? What draws you to that versus other mediums, other forms of writing?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, it has been a while since I got into journalism. I think I was always attracted to the sense of immediacy about it. There are not a lot of careers where you get a wide and immediate impact to what you do, So we produce a piece of journalism. Sometimes there isn't a lot of reaction, but sometimes it resonates with people on social media. And you get comments. Sometimes you get story ideas. Sometimes you get criticism. But it leads occasionally to reactions from people in power, and that can affect change. And that's a special thing. So it's probably a cliche to say that journalism is lively and open and fun, but it is. It's a great thing. And when you think of other forms of writing, it's probably less creative than fiction, but it's probably more lively than academic writing. So we like to say in journalism, write how people talk. So hopefully that creates a connection with people, in how they normally communicate.
This definitely makes me think of on the other end of the spectrum, when you publish a novel, say, or you publish a book with a big publisher, sometimes the publication date can be 2 to 3 years out from when you sign the contract, which means by the time you've written about something, if it happens to be a particularly timely topic, it might not be timely anymore by the time it actually shows up. So that ability to be agile seems quite attractive, honestly, as a medium for communicating information.
Yeah, it does. And if you're a news reporter, often that means, going to a story meeting at 9 a.m. and turning in a story by the end of the day, and probably filing social media posts along the way, and, maybe doing one for the web, one for radio. Often it's a different experience every day.
Speaking of story meetings, I'm really curious because we come to this very much from a fiction perspective, or at least I personally do, and a storytelling perspective. Now, often the most memorable journalistic pieces are more than just they're just the facts, man. The adage there. They're more than just their basic units of information. They're narratives. They're like any other story. So, in your experience as a journalist, what's the connection between journalism, good journalism, and storytelling? The storytelling piece that goes into communicating these things.
Probably real people, bringing a story to a personal level, showing, how change can be impacted. That's really the core of journalism. So, like wherever you are, probably there's a real housing crisis here in Halifax. We've had a long-standing serious problem with homelessness that affects a lot of people who are living in tents, but more recently, it's really affecting single-parent families who simply can't afford what's available. So, simply in Halifax here, watching, the news media coverage of the stories and the predicaments that people are in are really, really heart-wrenching. So, you've got all the informational aspects. You've got, the vacancy rate and the average price of houses and rents and, average incomes and inflation. All of that's really good. And that's the factual part of the story that you need to get as journalists. But, we can cover issues, we can highlight problems, but if we're not actually covering the impact, then we're probably doing only half the job. So, today I was listening to CBC Radio this morning, and there was a fantastic piece on the effect of forest fires on Indigenous communities in BC. And, we all know climate change is happening, but
you'd think we all know.
Well, yeah, but in many cases, it's happening somewhere else. It's happening in Texas, or it's happening, other provinces, that type of thing. So, especially where disaster strikes. So, this piece was really good, right? It did a really good job of capturing sort of the despair at the pace of government action on climate change, but also capturing the hope of people doing individual community actions. So, yeah, it was a really nice piece.
And to be clear for everyone who's listening at home, this is not about spinning a story. We're not really talking here about trying to manipulate feelings out of people to sway opinions one way or another. I think really it is more about trying to touch on the pathos of human beings, because especially with just being hyper plugged into news cycles and social media, which is quite an interest of yours, we can get burnt out and we can get sort of like empathy fatigue and all these things where we see these oftentimes terrible things and go, there it is, sucks to suck, and we don't feel it. And oftentimes when we don't feel something, we don't think to take an action on it or do deeper digging on it. So I don't know. Have you seen the way that putting that kind of storytelling together, putting that narrative together with the aim of connecting with people's lived experience with their hearts? Have you seen how that can change the way that a story is received?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you say about fatigue, right? But I think, raw emotion from people is never something that when it really affects you and it's authentic, that's something that's gripping every time you hear it, every time you see it. So, that's what we try to do in journalism, right? And certainly not to have any anything going on that would not make it ethical and true, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's why we often try to ask people questions in the moment, is to get their actual reaction to something. So, we spent a lot of time on that here at King's in the journalism school, asking questions, doing interviewing, because having a meaningful conversation with people is one thing, but once you put an audio recorder in front of somebody or video camera and maybe they're a little bit nervous, that's a whole another layer, right? And putting people at ease, that takes some skill, in addition to, asking people, more than just, so how does this make you feel, which is sometimes a bit of a bait of a question. So, so yeah, it's, there's a lot of nuance to it. And we talk a fair bit about, how do you get authentic reactions from people without playing them as victims.
Yeah, and it can be sensitive material often as well. Even the stuff that can be portrayed as objectively positive can still be very, just very much for a human emotionally. So I imagine, we talk about bedside manner a lot of the time when we speak in the medical field, but I imagine there's also a certain mannerism that journalists have to learn or curate or adopt if they don't start out with it to put people at ease so that they get those genuine reactions. And so I wonder what kind of tools and resources and learning the students kind of get on that side of things, the more social side of things.
Well, in many cases, we use our phones for a lot of the production we do these days. But, and still in some cases, we have the big, video cameras that you'd use to shoot a TV broadcast with. And when you bring those to an interview, the cameras are still pretty big. You put it up on a tripod. It can be intimidating to put that in front of people. So, one of the old journalism tricks, right, is to give your source the mic, and say, oh, I'm just going to, fiddle with some dials here and things like this. And often, being a part of the production process, put some people at ease and helps them understand that, we're all just doing a job here.
Sounds like it helps to also put them into the collaborative experience of telling what is ultimately their story. If you're asking for their thoughts and opinions on something, then they're a part of it. Yeah.
Well, exactly. And not having it, we're journalizing you, like
here's the pedestal, step on.
Exactly. And, you are the source and we're the reporter. I mean, I think, it's not so much like that anymore, especially, if you just pull up a phone, you're much more of a conversation than it is a process.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of, I'd love to hear a bit about, again, we've said this already once, but you've been in the game for a while. This is not your first rodeo. So I'd love to hear about how you've seen the practice of journalism evolving, especially in the last couple of years with regard to our current era, the deadly pandemic that is still making the rounds, and just kind of all of the information and misinformation and all the things that are happening, especially in social media, which has become kind of one of our largest sources for news.
Yeah, so I welcomed some of the students in the humanities side of our university last week, and I mentioned to them that the fact that everybody was wearing a mask in class, and almost everybody was vaccinated, that was a real testament to journalism, right? That because how many of us has actually read the scientific studies, right? That these vaccines are being tested. How many people are attending healthcare briefings every week? Probably not many of us, right? But if at least in Nova Scotia here, we're close to beating this. We're not that far away from getting back to normal. So if we're near that goal, it's largely due that the fact that people trust the media. And to me anyway, that's been fascinating to watch over the past couple of months, because I don't personally recall any issue that has received as much scrutiny as the pandemic and vaccines, right? And there have never been people more interested in what they put into their bodies. So, to me, this is a huge intersection with journalism. Are these vaccines safe? What does the evidence say? What does it tell us? What doesn't it tell us? What are the risks? Should we be taking horse drugs? I don't know. So it's been fascinating to watch, right? Because it's really prompted journalists to tell science in plain language. When you're talking about mRNA vaccines, and what is that? And what is that?
I remember when I even went to get mine, I was like, what does that do? Like, tell me how that goes. Yeah, as a lay person who doesn't necessarily have access to that information. Science communicators have been like, shout out to all of the science communicators that are out there, because you are doing amazing work.
Exactly. Right. And then there's just different perspectives on vaccines, like what are legitimate differences in opinion, right? And what is, where does false balance come in when you're interviewing people who, believe in pseudoscience? And, how much of a voice does uninformed opinion warrant when we're talking about, creating a journalism story? So then, of course, you layer in all of the fake news and the distrust of elites and the power of Facebook. It's been a fascinating stew, over the past 18 months, right? And then, and then there's the layer of the journalism biz itself, right? So I don't think it's any coincidence that Black Lives Matter and the discussions about the importance of reckoning with colonialism, whether the fact that all of that has happened at the same time. So in journalism here, we've had to look at ourselves fairly seriously in the past couple of years, to look at how white our newsrooms are, who's in charge, who's making decisions, how that's shaped our reporting. So also in journalism education, and the whiteness of that, what we teach and how we teach it. So, on top of the reporting aspect, there's also been a lot of reflection in the journalism biz about what we do and whose stories we've been telling and how responsive we've been to our entire audience. So all of that, yeah, for sure.
On that reflective note, I have a very simple question for you. It's a very pedestrian, normal thing to ask people, which is, what does truth mean to you personally, specifically? When you hear the word truth, what comes to mind? What are the associations that has with it?
Oh, that's an easy one. I think in one sense it speaks to what we do in journalism, right? It's that whole sense of research and discovery. It's it's a search for what's knowable. It's what we do as journalists, right? To find out what happened. That's in many cases what we do. So, Um, you know, the bigger question, I think, maybe even the most important question, is how close we can get to that truth, or whether we can include enough perspectives to actually fully represent truth, or, can we do it in a way that isn't a 2-hour long video piece or like a 10,000 word story, or, something like that. Back in the day, it probably even predates me, Sienna, but, there's a certain, American news anchor who ended his nightly news and said, and that's the way it is, and I think we look back now and say, was it, and we look at it through a different lens, like, that it just was what it was. So, since we're talking about my age here, I'm old enough. I'm old enough, to say that when I went to university, a truthful telling of Canadian history, was largely about, the narratives of colonialism, right, and what white men did. And sure, there was labor history and social history that included women, but it wasn't anywhere near as mainstream as what it is now. So, I think, when we look at truth, it's like the bigger question is probably, how complete is it? So I'm always a little bit wary when I hear people who say, oh, I know what the truth is. Because to me, that often speaks from a place of intolerance or closed-mindedness, and I think what we try to stress in the journalism school here is that constantly questioning what you know and what you think is a big part of journalism, and getting out of your comfort zone and talking to people outside of your socioeconomic sphere and all of that. So, like I say, I suspect my humanities colleagues talk a bit more about truth in the abstract, because they talk about Plato and Aristotle here and all of that. But, I think, how is truth shaped by our own experiences? I think that's probably the better question.
Yeah. And truth is a moving target. The same way science is kind of a moving target. Like we don't, we make a discovery, or we prove a theory, or something happens to expand our understanding. And then we have to rework everything from the ground up sometimes, whether that's like socially speaking, or in terms of infrastructure, in terms of logistics, in terms of, socially bearing things. So yeah, I am curious about what in your career, your journalistic career, has kind of prompted you to expand your own notions of what is true.
Yeah, it is, it's largely through, reading, consuming media, reporting, and also, subscribing to media outside the mainstream, right? Typically the Canadian landscape, certainly nationally, has been, a couple of national newspapers and the CBC and the organizations that have broadcast licenses. So one of the great things recently, of course, is that we have so many more smaller independent media outlets that, provide a different lens on the news, and, that it isn't just the news, right? It's often, news for different audiences, and those can be quite different.
So we mentioned earlier about kind of looking at the newsrooms and the demographics of the newsrooms, and also looking at people's stories and which ones were being represented and disproportionately represented, and so on. And I think this kind of ties into something that I wanted to walk into with you, which is also something that you're quite interested in as a journalist, which is the ethics of journalism itself, and the responsibilities of a journalist to their communities, both kind of locally and then more broadly, up all the way perhaps into the global stage. So in your experience, what are a journalist's responsibilities to the communities that they are writing about or for?
Goodness. So well, so I think we've pretended that we always write about everyone, and when we look back, that clearly hasn't been the case. So from my perspective, when we look at inequality and who's served and who isn't served, inequality is almost always about power, if many communities haven't been well served by the media, and they haven't, I think it's because the media hasn't represented them very well. So it's clear now, as it always has been, that the newsrooms are really, really too white, and editors and producers have been signing the stories, and they probably haven't been hooked into a lot of communities. They haven't heard a lot of stories. They haven't, brought forward many voices, from those communities. And many journalists just haven't had the knowledge and the connections to those sources to be able to tell the story from everyone's community. And in fact, what we thought was a broad audience actually, turns out that it's been a fairly narrow audience, for sure.
Yeah, and I imagine, seeing as you've got quite a lot to say about this, that this is the kind of inequality and sort of systemic problem that students of journalism these days are being made aware of from the get-go, to really consider their place in the ecosystem, in the journalistic ecosystem, in the ecosystem of communicating information.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious even further about, and this is just because personally, this is something I always heard when I was just, in the ecosystem of communication at all, is that like objectivity, this goes even all the way back to like high school and writing papers for, persuasive essays and all this, like objectivity is key, right? You have to have a distance, cool, impassionate perspective on what's going on. And that's the only way you're going to be able to accurately represent what's going on. And I'm not going to necessarily say that that's completely false, but I'm curious about what you think about subjectivity or personal investment in a story, how that can impact the writing and the delivery of a story, for good or for ill.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a journalism industry, we have to wear a lot of what we framed as objectivity. In many ways, it's been our creation, that how people understand and how people look at the media as being objective. So, I mean, I guess in one sense, objectivity is looking at how, certainly internally, media managers, editors, and producers have shut down conversations about racial inequality in the newsroom, right? I mean, we've often said, "Oh, you're not objective, right?" when you bring culture or race into the newsroom, and in many cases, that's just like reinforced the status quo. Yeah. We've also used objectivity as a way of dismissing, perspectives that aren't in the mainstream. Oh, that's too out there, right? You're not being objective, so. It's been a way of applying a particular lens. So, there's that sense, right? There's also the sense of objectivity being, a bias to middle-class privilege, because, certainly in journalism, there's been a sense, and I've heard it through my career, right? You got to pay your dues, you got to go to that small town newspaper and, work for near minimum wage, and it's going to be long hours. And, do you have a car? Because you got to have that too, right? So there's a sense that, the only way to do journalism, and this lens of, has been very much a middle-class thing, and that, that sort of work for free, do internships for free, all of that is certainly, of interest to our students these days, have been framed through a, middle-class privilege. And I think journalism schools are more aware of that these days than they have been. What else? I mean, there's also, I think, the element of, in journalism, that objectivity, has we frame objectivity as a deference to the police and other power structures, that somehow just getting the facts from official sources, and we haven't challenged those institutional structures as much as we should have. And, that, affects, how we've reported on, street checks and incarceration rates and sentencing, and how all of these practices have affected people of color, and that we really haven't challenged, the police and governments perhaps as much as we should. And that, is something. So, I would like to think we haven't taught objectivity in, really for a number of years now. I've asked my faculty a number of times, like, do we actually use the word objectivity? And, most of them, say, no, we don't, we talk about fairness, we talk about independence, we talk about all of those other, journalistic attributes, and the idea, what we do is we talk about objectivity mainly in the sense of, is independence and fairness, is that even achievable, right? Because we can only try as much as we can to be independent, but we can't get out of our own skins. So, objectivity isn't necessarily an attainable goal.
I wondered about that. Yeah, the human who's filming or the human who's asking questions has their own human experience and perspective. So yeah, I don't know if it's possible to divest from that.
Yeah, so I don't think we talk about objectivity much at all. But if we do, we hopefully it's framed in that sense of, in the same way that we ask judges to, try a case and put their personal assumptions aside. And, we ask other professionals to do the same thing. We don't believe you totally can, but it's still, a method. It's still something you strive for. And we have a whole bunch of, journalistic practices where we try to help people do that. So it's really about, removing your own assumptions, right? And going where the evidence takes you, and thinking about yourself and what you're doing and which audience you're serving and all of that. So I think a lot of it has to do with humility, because if you think that you can attain some objectivity, you're probably not doing good journalism. And if you're a little bit humble by understanding that you will never understand what the truth is, but all you can do is try to get there as best as you can, then you're doing the best you can and doing good journalism.
It's good advice. I wonder if you have any, actually, my segue is flawless, because I'm now here to ask you about advice, if you're in an advice-given mood, for specifically people who are about to embark on perhaps a career in journalism, whether it's a prospective student who's thinking to go into the program or someone who's landed their first gig and is getting excited to do this. What do you wish you had known beforehand? Like if you could go back and give, at the beginning of your career, like here's this little tidbit, it's gonna make your life easier, or more enriched or whatever, what would you want to deliver?
I think I'd say take care of yourself. I would say there's still a suck it up aspect to journalism. You got the crusty old editor and just get the story, whether that's a cliche now. I mean, deadlines are still important, right? And there's still, you still can't, go to air live and not have anything. That's important. So there is that aspect of get the story, and we still teach that. But that can have consequences too. And there's it's not a cliche to say there's a lot of burnout in the field. And, it's no real surprise to see that a lot of reporters leave for communications once they hit middle age, right? They have families, the hours are better, sometimes the pay is better. So, there's that. It's really important to understand that in some ways, the field of journalism, has always had new young people coming into it, so that there's always been a constant supply of people interested in it because it's such an interesting field and because there's no barrier to entry. I mean, journalism isn't an accredited profession, right? It's not like law or not like accounting. Anyone can become a journalist, as the phrase goes. So, there's that. So I think that advice I'd give to people is understand, and take care of yourself and put limitations. But I guess the other thing I'd say is that, know that journalism is a really big tent, and I don't think I understood that when I got in, that you can find a place for yourself. Like there's a whole bunch of different kinds of journalism. You can be a podcaster, you can be a news reporter, you can work as an editor, you can work as a producer. There's a whole, you work on social media, there's a whole range of things you can do. And, if you don't consider yourself great on air, you can work in text, if you don't consider yourself, really, someone who works on daily deadlines, or likes, working with words more, you can be an editor or producer. So there's always a place for you, no matter what you want to do. It's a big tent.
It's a big tent. Big circus tent. Let's talk about the King's College circus tent of journalism. Tell us about what is special about the journalism program where you teach. Why would folks want to come study journalism at King's specifically?
Well, one thing is we're on the practical side of journalism schools. So there's some journalism schools are in a broader school of communications and have that bent to it. And, they study the media. We just do reporting. We don't do a lot of studying of the media. Our students don't write a lot of essays. So, I joked with our humanities folks that you won't see our journalism students in the library very often. Their library are the people of Halifax and websites and stuff like that. So that's where they get their information. So it's we're on the practical side. We focus on the doing of journalism. We are small here, right? I mean, King's is maybe 1,000 students, and we probably have about 180 in journalism across our 3 programs and, various years. So it's small. I tell people, like, I'm not Professor Currie, despite the way you introduced me.
You should have told me ahead of time.
Exactly. No, I'm Tim, and I'm not Mr. Currie. And we're basically here at King's. We're a big high school in terms of size. Most people went to high schools that were bigger than us. So it's really it's hands-on. So we sit with people, and because we have a focus on publication and broadcasting, most of what students do is to produce it for the public. So that means a lot of sitting side by side, going through stories, editing, where'd you get this information? Do we have a better quote for here? What's your picture? All of this. So a lot of it's informal, sitting down, working through stories, trying to get it up on our website, The Signal. And it's just a very sort of informal aspect. Like I say, there isn't a lot of, you hand in a story and that's it, it's done. There's a lot of drafts and edits and things like that. So it's a different type of collaborative learning, I would say. And I think that's one of our strengths for sure.
It sounds very experiential, which is the kind of thing that you'd want in a field that is kind of like necessarily you're going to be making contact with the world all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, fascinating. So if you have someone who's been listening along at home, or somebody who's been kind of skimming the King's College website and is interested in getting in touch to ask more questions or possibly to apply to the program, where can they go? Where should they be pointed to next? What are the next steps?
Oh, well, definitely go and check out our program page. It's ukings.ca/journalism, and that will take you to our 3 programs. So some folks will come to us at a high school, and there's a 4-year program for that. We also have a 1-year Bachelor of Journalism program for folks who already have some kind of undergraduate degree, not journalism. And we have a 2-year master's program as well. So that URL will take you to all 3 of our programs, and also take you to our admissions office people, and you can find out what the process is for applying and what you need and all of that. So, like I say, most of our folks in the admissions office also on a first name basis. So they can answer questions you have as well.
Well, Tim, it's been wonderful to talk to you this afternoon. Thank you so much for coming and spending a little bit of time with us and telling us a bit about the shape of journalism today. This has been I've learned so much. This has been really cool.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks so much, Sienna.
Of course. And thank you to everybody who has been listening in at home. To find out more about the King's College journalism programs, you can go to ukings.ca/journalism. To check out more events and discussions during our 2021 Word on the Street Book Festival, go to toronto.thewordonthestreet.ca. From all of us at WOTS, happy reading and happy studying.